The Subcommittee on Oversight and Research and Technology will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess of the subcommittee at any time. Good morning. Welcome to today's hearing entitled Beyond Bitcoin, Emerging Applications for Blockchain Technology. I'm going to recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Again, good morning and welcome to the panelists. I think I've met most of you to this Joint Oversight and Research and Technology Subcommittee hearing. And again, the title is Beyond Bitcoin, Emerging Application for Blockchain Technology. The purpose of this hearing is to explore blockchain technology, its potential, and emerging applications beyond cryptocurrency and financial technology. Today, we will hear from government and private sector experts about the basics of blockchain technology and the ways this emerging technology can be leveraged to improve the provision of products and services for government and industry alike. Historically, the Science Committee has engaged in vigorous oversight of emerging forms of research and technology, especially those that stand to directly benefit business and government by ensuring their reliability, increasing their productivity, and securing systems and data. This hearing is an opportunity to learn more about the standards, guidelines, and best practices that may be necessary to ensure the effective and appropriate implementation of blockchain technology to those emerging applications. And I look forward to hearing from the witnesses today about improving, certainly, our government efficiency and private sector successes with this technology. And while there has been much discussion throughout Congress regarding the cryptocurrencies, this hearing is not intended to discuss those directly, such as Bitcoin, and the numerous reported security, regulatory, and environmental issues associated with them. And although Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are popular and eye-catching examples of the use of blockchain technology, we will learn today that there are many emerging applications with much potential that could eventually provide substantial benefits to businesses and taxpayers. The committee hopes to highlight this often underreported use of blockchain technology without getting caught up in the topic of the recently volatile and unsecure cryptocurrencies. We are also interested in the ongoing proactive efforts and the coordination among private industries utilizing blockchain technology in different areas of their business models. I wish to thank Mr. Cuomo for being here to represent IBM. Mr. Yamas is representing Walmart, and we look forward to hearing about the specific actions of IBM and Walmart have taken to utilize and harness the strength of this technology, especially in the supply chain and data management domains. Beyond an interest in the application of blockchain technology, the Science Committee will continue to address cybersecurity and how incorporation of blockchain technology could potentially bolster private companies and the federal government's cybersecurity weaknesses. Cybersecurity is a complex and evolving issue that affects U.S. national and economic security, and we must consider the appropriate role for blockchain technology. All departments and agencies must remain diligent in their efforts to strengthen and secure our federal systems, and our approaches to addressing cybersecurity issues must evolve to keep pace with the ever-changing threats. Bolstering the cybersecurity of federal information systems is among the committee's top priorities, and I'm hopeful that our efforts here today will take us one step closer to achieving this objective. Dr. Romaine, we appreciate NIST being here, and thank you for the continuing to provide the guidance on this emerging technology. I know it's an evolving and very rapidly changing field. NIST is in a unique position to provide valuable standards and guidelines for blockchain with their extensive involvement with cryptography, the mathematical tools at the heart of blockchain technology. NIST has the ability to effectively ensure current standards are sufficient in addressing potential for blockchain technology being utilized on a broader and a more intensive scale. And additionally, NIST can serve a useful role in providing a greater understanding of how the technology could lead to solutions that help secure data and ultimately enhance our national security, which is critical. I look forward to the insight of our witnesses today. They will provide, which will help resolve these important questions and hopefully help us better understand the next steps that must be taken to ensure the integrity, the resilience, and the security of systems and industries that could and do benefit from the application of this technology. Next, Mr. Barr. I now recognize the ranking member of the Oversight Subcommittee, the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Barr, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. Congratulations on your new chairmanship of this Oversight.
I appreciate that.
And I want to thank you and Chairwoman Comstock for putting on this hearing. It's a fascinating topic. I've been asking everyone I know in the last week to explain blockchain technology to me. No one can. People can spell it, that's about all. So I'm hoping that after we get finished today, you guys will also explain special relativity and quantum mechanics to the rest of the team too. But this really is incredibly important. I just came back from the World Economic Forum where it seemed like every other forum was about blockchain technology. So entrepreneurs, innovators, big business, small businesses, small enterprises, everyone seems to be scrambling to understand the applications of blockchain technology. And as the hearing title suggests, it seems to be quickly moved past Bitcoin and past cryptocurrencies into supply chain industry, healthcare, clean energy field, legal, financial markets, election infrastructure. I read a great article last week about how it could affect education in the years to come. So this potential blockchains offer better security, enhanced privacy, transactional transparency. But it's also obviously a disruptive technology, and so government and law enforcement agencies are trying to start to figure out the ramifications of blockchain services and applications. We know they have a difficult task ahead of them, and as a nation, I believe that all of us want to ensure that these blockchain-based technologies are used appropriately, that government regulations are not disregarded or intentionally circumvented, but at the same time that they aren't burdensome, that we're encouraging innovation and broad-based applications when appropriate and advantageous. So I'm particularly interested in hearing all that you have to say. I'm in the specific steps that you believe the U.S. government, particularly our science-based agencies, NIST, National Science Foundation, Department of Energies, and Homeland Security, should be taking to foster innovation in this field and to help ensure that America is the hub for blockchain research, development, and discovery. By the way, Chairman Abraham, I believe the Science Committee can play an important oversight role in providing a public forum to address these and many other issues. So I'm hoping that past blockchain will look at the ethical issues surrounding artificial intelligence and mimicking software, where we draw the limits and regulate such technology, that we think about the security consequences of deploying autonomous vehicles, drones, and other similar technologies. What are the technical challenges and the ethical implications of implantable medical devices and brain-computer interfaces? And how can we or should we keep a closer eye on the deployment of commercially owned and operated biometric and other surveillance technologies, both online in the streets and in the retail stores across America? This is a very fun committee to be on because we're dealing with so many things that are absolute, that we wouldn't have predicted 3 years ago, maybe last year. So thank you very much for coming and educating us. We hope to ask intelligent questions. We hope to be a lot smarter at the end of this. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Byer. I now recognize the Chair of the Research and Technology Subcommittee, Ms. Comstock, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Abraham, for putting together this hearing on such an important topic, and congratulations on your new position as Chairman of the Oversight Subcommittee. Today's hearing topic is of great interest to me and my constituents in the Commonwealth of Virginia. The 10th District attracts many of the leading internet, high-tech, health, and defense companies in the world, and the Northern Virginia region is home to many research and technology companies on the forefront of innovation. A recent overview by the National Institute of Standards and Technology describes blockchains as, quote, a significant new avenue for technological advancements enabling secure transactions without the need for a central authority, end quote. While many of my more technologically inclined constituents may grasp the cryptocurrency benefits of blockchain technology, today's hearing will provide some insights into blockchain's applications beyond cryptocurrency. Blockchains have a myriad of applications in areas such as cybersecurity, identity authentication and verification, supply chain risk management, and digital rights management, among others. These applications have potential implications and benefits for the federal government. A recent Department of Transportation report notes that there are several proposed ongoing and theoretical ways of applying blockchains in government. This includes the State Department's exploration of ways to use blockchain to improve efficiency, as well as research by the Postal Service and Department of Homeland Security on how blockchains may help in the establishment of secure identity management. I'm pleased to hear about such efforts. In the previous session of Congress, the Research and Technology Subcommittee held a hearing following the many data breaches at the Office of Personnel Management. Like thousands of my constituents, I too received a letter from OPM informing me that my personal information may have been compromised or stolen by the criminals behind this attack. I also received a letter from the IRS on the same. And I think I got 3 letters, so I think I hit the trifecta on letters and information being compromised. So I look forward to hearing more about the potential and emerging applications of blockchain technology today, particularly if the technology can help with securing people's private and sensitive information. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Comstock. I'm going to introduce our witnesses now. Our first witness today is Mr. Chris Jacaran, an analyst in cybersecurity policy with the Congressional Research Service. Mr. Jacaran previously worked for the Department of Homeland Security, starting in 2005 as a program analyst before being promoted in 2008 to planner. He holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from Syracuse University, a master's degree in public policy from George Mason University, and a graduate certificate in cybersecurity fundamentals from the Naval Postgraduate School. Dr. Charles Romine, our second witness, is a Director of Information Technology at NIST. Dr. Romine joined NIST in 2009 as an Associate Director for Program Implementation. In November 2011, Dr. Romine became the Director of Information Technology Laboratory at NIST. Dr. Romine received both his Bachelor's of Arts degree in mathematics and a PhD in applied mathematics from the University of Virginia. Mr. Jerry Cuomo, our next witness, is an IBM Fellow and a Vice President of Blockchain Technologies at IBM. Mr. Cuomo has worked with IBM since 1987 as an engineer with IBM Research. He was promoted in 2001 to an IBM Distinguished Engineer, and in 2006, he became an IBM Fellow. He received a master's degree in computer science from New York University Polytechnic School of Engineering. Mr. Frank Yanis, our fourth witness, is Vice President of Food Safety at Walmart. Mr. Yanis previously worked for Walt Disney World as Director of Safety Health from 1989 to 2008. He holds a bachelor's degree of science in microbiology from the University of Central Florida and a master's degree in public health from the University of South Florida. Our last witness, Mr. Aaron Wright, is an associate clinical professor and co-director of the Blockchain Project at the Benjamin N. Cardozo School of Law. Mr. Wright holds a Bachelor's of Arts degree from Tufts University and a Juris Doctorate from the Benjamin N. Cardozo School of Law. I now recognize Mr. Jacaran for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Thank you. Chairs Abraham and Comstock, Ranking Members Beyer and Lipinski, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on blockchain. My name is Chris Jacaran, and I am an analyst in cybersecurity policy at the Congressional Research Service. In this role, I research and analyze a variety of information technology issues, to include blockchain. My testimony today includes an explanation of blockchain, potential applications for it, limitations and concerns in using it, and potential considerations for Congress. Blockchain is not a new technology. Rather, it is an innovative way of using technologies we already have. The technology allows parties that may not trust each other to agree on the current distribution of assets, who has those assets, so they may conduct new business. But while there has been hype surrounding blockchain, it also has certain pitfalls that may inhibit its utility. Blockchain is a digital ledger that allows parties to transact without the use of a central authority. In this ledger, transactions are grouped together in blocks, which are cryptographically tamper-proof. And those blocks are cryptographically chained together in a way that creates an indisputable history. With blockchain, the use of a third party can be avoided because as transactions are added, the identities of the parties conducting those transactions are verified, and the transactions themselves are verifiable by other users. The strong relationship between identities, transactions, and the ledger enables parties that may not trust each other to agree on the state of resources as logged in that ledger. With that agreement, they may conduct a new transaction with a common understanding of who has which resource and their ability to trade that resource. Blockchain is not a new single technology, rather it uses existing technologies in a novel way. Blockchain is enabled by asymmetric key encryption, hash values, Merkle trees, and peer-to-peer networks. My written statement goes further into these. Blockchain is not a panacea technology. A blockchain records events as transactions when they happen, in the order they happen, and in an add-on only manner. Previous data on the blockchain cannot be altered, and users of the blockchain have access to the data on the blockchain in order to validate the distribution of resources. Some advocate the use of blockchain when a combination of off-the-shelf database, cloud, and identity management technology would likely be more appropriate. An advantage to blockchain emerges when users want the ledger to be undeniable and traceable. Though there are benefits to blockchain, there are also pitfalls and unsolved conditions which may inhibit blockchain use. Some of those concerns are data portability, ill-defined requirements, key security, user collusion, and user safety. My written statement elaborates on these further. As with adopting any technology, users must examine the business, legal, and technical aspects of that technology. What is the business case for the technology? Do customers demand attributes which it provides, or will employees benefit from them? What are the legal implications for using the new technology? Will adhering to compliance regimes be made easier or more difficult through using it? Will data held in the new technology be accessible to auditors for review, or will it inhibit regulated transparency? Finally, what are the specific technologies that will be adopted? What are the attributes of that technology, and how will it affect current business practices, and how will they adapt over time? Blockchain is currently being tested by industry, but at this time does not appear to be a complete replacement for existing systems. My written statement provides a few examples of how blockchain is being employed, piloted, or proposed. One such example is to manage electronic health records. In this example, actual medical records are retained on provider systems, but a record of that record is published to the blockchain. As identities are cryptographically signed to include those of patients, providers, payers, and other parties, the patient can manage who has access to those records by publishing access rights to specific identities on the blockchain. This is designed to shift the control of these records toward the patient. While technically feasible, this proposal would likely still face federal and state privacy laws, as well as a lack of standards in data processing and storage, which may inhibit its adoption. Through the adoption of blockchain, though the adoption of blockchain is in its early stages, Congress may have a role to play in several areas, including providing oversight of federal agencies seeking to use blockchain for government business or regulating industries using blockchain. Some federal agencies are seeking to better manage identities, assets, data, and contracts through the adoption of blockchain technology. In addition, some federal agencies are issuing guidance on industry use of blockchain and whether or not the current legal framework governs blockchain use. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Doctor. I now recognize Dr. Romine for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Chairman Abraham, Ranking Member Beyer, Chairwoman Comstock, and Ranking Member Lipinski, and members of the subcommittees, I'm Chuck Romine, the Director of the Information Technology Laboratory at the Department of Commerce's National Institute of Standards and Technology, also known as NIST. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss NIST's role in blockchain technologies. Blockchains are defined as immutable digital ledger systems implemented in a distributed fashion, that is, without a central repository. At their most basic level, they enable a community of users to record transactions in a ledger that is public to that community so that transactions cannot be changed once published without the community knowing. The core ideas behind blockchain technology emerged in 1991, and this technology became widely known in 2008 when the blockchain idea was combined with several other technologies and computing concepts to enable the creation of modern cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin are electronic money protected through cryptographic mechanisms, or blockchains for secure funds transfer. Blockchains are often viewed as synonymous with Bitcoin, but its applications are broader than fund transfer security. Its use cases vary from banking to secure supply chains to insurance and, as you've heard, healthcare. The use of blockchain technology, however, is not a silver bullet. Some issues must be considered, such as how to deal with malicious users, how controls are applied, and the limitations of any blockchain implementation. NIST has a strong research program in advancing key components of the blockchain, such as measurement science for computer security, cryptography, and cryptographic key management, creating solutions to real-world problems. In January 2018, NIST published a draft report, Blockchain Technology Overview, which is now out for public comment. The report introduces the concept of blockchain, discusses its use in electronic currency, and shows its broader applications. NIST has conducted extensive research on asymmetric key cryptography, also referred to as public-private key cryptography, which is a fundamental technology to secure blockchain technologies. NIST develops, maintains, and tests implementations that meet NIST's standards and guidelines for key generation and derivation, key establishment, and key exchanges. Because blockchains are not centralized, users must manage their own private keys, meaning if one is lost, anything related to that private key, such as digital assets, is lost. If a private key is stolen, the attacker will have full access to all assets controlled by that private key. Therefore, security of private keys is critical. When the news media reports that Bitcoin was stolen from, it almost certainly means that the private keys were found and used to sign a transaction sending the money to a new account, not that the system itself was compromised. Looking forward, quantum computers will be a threat to blockchain technologies because they will be able to break the code and crack the public key crypto systems. NIST is leading the global effort to ensure new encryption is available to industry and built into products before quantum computers emerge. Research at NIST to more generally use blockchain platforms is ongoing via the NIST Blockchain Workbench, which provides flexible test beds that NIST researchers can use to implement theoretical solutions. This hands-on experience is essential to complement NIST interactions with industry and documentary standards research when NIST issues papers, guidance, tools, and references. Blockchains are a new and exciting technology that have the potential to address real corporate and consumer needs, but much work still needs to be done to understand this technology, to bring out its potential, and let markets reward usable and secure implementations that meet real customer needs. NIST will continue its research and development in the foundational cryptography that blockchains use. We will continue to learn from our research and continue to build collaborations with industry in the publication of guidelines. NIST also continues to work with international standards bodies that have started study groups and technical committees to initiate standards work for blockchains. This is an exciting time for blockchain technology as it emerges into markets and sectors. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on NIST's work regarding blockchain, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Romine. I now recognize Mr. Cuomo for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Good morning, Chairman Abraham, Chairwoman Comstock, Ranking Members Beyer and Lipinski, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Jerry Cuomo, and I'm the Vice President for IBM Blockchain Technologies. And thank you very much for the opportunity to testify this morning. Most people who've heard of blockchain associate it with the cryptocurrency Bitcoin. While they're related, it's important to understand that they're not the same. The potential uses for blockchain are far broader than cryptocurrency. We've engaged in more than 400 blockchain projects across supply chain, government, healthcare, transportation, insurance, chemical, petroleum, and more. And from those experiences, we've developed 3 key benefits. First, we believe that blockchain is a transformative technology that could radically change the way businesses and government interact. At the center of a blockchain is a shared immutable ledger. Each member of a blockchain network has an exact copy of the ledger as it updates over time. Transactions, once entered, cannot be changed. With this shared copy of the truth, time is saved because multi-party transactions could be now settled in real time. Cost is reduced because overhead is eliminated with businesses interacting directly. Risk is mitigated because the ledger acts as an immutable audit trail. IBM and Maersk recently announced a joint venture to create an industry-wide trading platform for ocean freight. Currently, a shipment of goods between ports can generate a sea of paperwork. Blockchain helps, in real time, track millions of shipping containers across the world, with the potential to save billions of dollars and transform the shipping industry. Our second belief is that blockchain must be open to encourage broad adoption, innovation, and interoperability. And for this reason, IBM is participating with over 180 industry players in the Hyperledger organization led by the Linux Foundation. Only with openness will blockchain be widely adopted and spur innovation. IBM is collaborating with companies like SecureKey and the Sovereign Foundation on blockchain-based digital identity. Together, we are working to create a global ecosystem of blockchain identity networks backed by open standards, where only the information that needs to be shared is shared with only those parties that have a need to know. And we finally believe that blockchain is ready for business and government use today. A new breed of blockchain technology is now available. It meets 4 key requirements. First, it supports accountability, which is gained by known parties identified by cryptographic membership keys, and trusted data from an immutable ledger. Next is privacy. While members are known to the network, transactions are only shared with those that have a need to know. Third is scalability, handling an immense volume of transactions. A recent research paper demonstrated best of class in blockchain performance of more than 3,500 transactions per second. And last but not least is security. With fault-tolerant algorithms, a network continues to operate even in the presence of bad actors or carelessness. IBM is working with 12 major food companies, including Walmart, Unilever, and Nestle, applying our enterprise blockchain to rapidly trace food as it moves from farm to table, making it possible to quickly pinpoint the sources of contamination, reduce the impact of food recalls, and limit the number of people who get sick or die from foodborne illnesses. Now, with those beliefs in mind, let me now turn to our recommendations to Congress. First, let's focus efforts on projects that can positively impact U.S. citizens and economic competitiveness. The Congressional Blockchain Caucus has already begun critical work on blockchain topics, including identity payments and supply chain. I recommend we use this work as the base to explore blockchain adoption, then use the knowledge gained to inform policy. The second recommendation is to thoughtfully insert blockchain into projects already funded. Look for opportunities to fuel innovation in the broad ecosystem of U.S. businesses by encouraging blockchain projects as part of initiatives like the Small Business Innovation Research Program. And finally, we urge Congress and the Trump administration, when considering regulatory policy, to recognize the difference between blockchain's use in new forms of currency from broader uses of blockchain to avoid consequences that stymie innovation. And please remember, blockchain is not Bitcoin. Blockchain is ready for government. Now, let's get government ready for blockchain. I look forward to answering your questions and continuing the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Cuomo. Mr. Giannis, I recognize you now for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Chairman Abraham, Comstock, and members of the committee. On behalf of Walmart, I want to thank you for the invitation to testify here today on the use of blockchain technology and its potential applications beyond cryptocurrency and finance. My name is Frank Giannis, Vice President of Food Safety for Walmart, the world's largest retailer. Walmart helps people around the world save money so they can live better. Each week, more than 260 million customers visit our nearly 12,000 stores in 28 countries or shop with us on our e-commerce platforms. With fiscal revenue in 2017 of $485.9 billion, grocery sales accounted for approximately 56% of those revenues in our U.S. formats. Operating in that many formats and in so many countries presents us with a daunting challenge and an important responsibility. Our customers rely on Walmart as their trusted buying agent. Too often people talk about a food chain, but it's not a linear chain at all. Today, the way we get our food from farm to table is a food system, and it's a complex network of many interdependent entities. While today's food system provides consumers with benefits, it also can present challenges. For example, the output of one contaminated ingredient could end up in thousands of products. We saw evidence of this during the peanut butter outbreak in 2008 and more recently with flour in 2016. Blockchain is a distributed, decentralized digital ledger that makes it possible to store and share data across complex networks in a more secure, effective, and democratic way. Features of immutability, consensus in a complex network without a single authority allowed the blockchain system to create one version of the truth and to rapidly scale trust, which is good for business. Today, many involved with food still use paper-based systems to manage records. And even if they capture that information in digital form, that data is often in disparate systems that don't speak with each other. Being able to track how food flows from farm to table can be a very difficult and lengthy task. Each participant discloses their product's path, one step forward and one step back. Regulators and retailers have to take that data and piece it together to find or manually determine the origin of a problem. For example, in 2006, in a nationwide outbreak of E. coli here in the U.S., it took regulators 2 weeks to conduct a traceback and determine the exact source of the contamination. We've seen similar timelines and outcomes in more recent food safety scares. In 2017, Walmart and IBM conducted 2 proof of concepts using blockchain for food traceability. For one pilot here in the U.S., we decided to track the journey of mangoes from farm to store. That journey includes several stops along the way before they arrive in our stores as packages of sliced mangoes. For the test, we worked with a supplier and their supply chain to capture food traceability attributes onto the blockchain. We captured information about the mangoes, where were they grown, how were they harvested, how did they travel, and so on. At the conclusion of that pilot, we demonstrated that we could accelerate tracing the origin of sliced mangoes back from our stores to a farm down from 7 days to 2.2 seconds. That's food traceability at the speed of thought. As the food system is global in nature, we also conducted a second pilot in China, and it involved pork, one of the region's most important animal proteins. With the use of blockchain technology, at the store, a case of pork could be scanned with a simple QR code and tracked back to the farm from which it came. We were also able to pull up digitized, authentic veterinary records, increasing our confidence in the authenticity of that product. After our successful pilots with IBM, we rapidly mobilized with a group of influential food companies to share our results, and we invited them to participate in additional testing. Today, we have a coalition of 11 foundation partners comprised of Walmart suppliers and peers in retail, all working together to further test blockchain. We seek a collaborative solution rather than each company trying to create one on their own. We're also placing emphasis on the importance of blockchain systems being interoperable and based on existing industry standards. Walmart and IBM and the foundation partners have moved rapidly to scale, test, and learn, and Walmart is now testing blockchain on dozens of selected food items. While we've been working on food traceability, we believe blockchain could lay the groundwork for other benefits beyond food traceability, such as optimizing supply chains and reducing food waste. Our ultimate goal is food transparency. By getting rid of the anonymity that exists in the food system today, we believe blockchain could help shine a light on every step of how that food is produced and travels. This enhanced transparency will result in a safer, more efficient, and sustainable food system so that people can live better. Thank you for the opportunity to share our thoughts on blockchain applications in food, and we look forward to answering any of your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Giannis. Mr. Wright, you have 5 minutes, sir.
Chairman Abraham, Ranking Member Beyer, Chairwoman Comstock, Ranking Member Lipinski, and members of the subcommittees, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. I hope my testimony will provide further insight on the potential and risks of blockchain technology, particularly with respect to next-generation public and open blockchains such as Ethereum. I also hope my testimony will spur these committees to support policies to continue to position the U.S. as a global leader in this technology. My name is Aaron Wright, and I am a law professor writing and teaching primarily in the area of technology law. Over the past 4 years, I've dedicated my academic efforts to researching and developing blockchain technology, writing about policy issues associated with blockchain technology, and counseling blockchain technology projects. As part of those efforts, I'm developing a project called Open Law in conjunction with the Consensus, which allows anyone to create smart legal agreements that leverage blockchain technology, serving as an advisor to an early-stage seed company, Block Apps, chairing the legal industry working group of the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, and helping to organize the Brooklyn Project, a collaborative industry effort to develop sensible regulatory standards for blockchain technology. As you've heard from the other witnesses, blockchains are useful for far more than just virtual currencies like Bitcoin. They're underpinning an array of online services that seek to use the technology to store information. However, I also wanted to emphasize that they're also being used to run potentially autonomous computer processes called smart contracts. Both blockchains and smart contract could potentially impact a range of industries in the United States, improving commercial activity. As we've seen over the past 2 years, blockchains are poised to transform capital markets. Blockchain technology is being explored to improve the efficiency of traditional financial services, creating digitized financial agreements that are settled and cleared on a bilateral basis with less of a need for third-party administration. Perhaps of greater long-term importance, blockchains are securing scarce digital assets, often referred to as tokens, which parties transfer using smart contracts in a secure and largely irreversible way, with less of a need for centralized intermediaries. These tokens are powering new forms of crowdfunding, often referred to as token sales, and serve as a potentially potent new tool for entrepreneurs to build powerful, new, network-based technology platforms. The sale of these tokens ultimately could democratize access to capital and help spur innovation throughout the United States, building a fairer society. The impact of blockchain technology is spreading to the legal industry and other industries heavily reliant on contractual arrangements to structure business activity. By using blockchain-based smart contracts to memorialize payment and performance obligations and recording agreements on a blockchain, we may move soon beyond an era with contracts written in natural language to an era where we have agreements written in code. Outside of the private sector, governments across the globe, including China, Japan, and the EU, are exploring blockchain technology in more detail and looking to see whether the technology can secure and manage critical public records, and exploring whether blockchains can improve government procurement and taxation processes. Through these efforts, it's conceivable that blockchains could anchor global and transnational systems, including universally accessible secure identification systems that could prevent abuses like human trafficking, secure voting systems, transnational land and IP registries, and global marketplaces available to all. Extending beyond governmental services, blockchains are increasingly being explored to control devices and machines in a secure manner. If these attempts prove successful, blockchains could foster a new era of machine-to-machine and machine-to-person interactions and commerce. Despite these opportunities, however, blockchains have a number of risks. Their disintermediate and transnational nature of public blockchains makes them difficult to govern and change, and they can be used to coordinate socially unacceptable and criminal conduct. Of greatest present concern, a slate of more anonymous new digital currencies are making it progressively easier to avoid anti-money laundering and other financial rules related to payment systems. Entrepreneurs are using blockchain technology to sell tokens in ways that avoid security law requirements, often with the aid of complicit lawyers that emphasize form over substance. Cryptocurrency exchanges for these digital goods, particularly those located abroad, appear to have implemented weak measures to prevent abusive trading practices. And new decentralized marketplaces and exchanges are emerging, which could operate without any centralized operator policing the network for legal activity. Due to the nascent nature of blockchains, the U.S. government has a unique ability to shape the development of the technology going forward. As a guiding principle, however, it's my hope that the U.S. proceeds with thoughtful, technology-neutral regulation that permits the exchange of blockchain-based assets, particularly those that are consumer-focused without undue regulation, that enables parties to build blockchain-based protocols to address some of the technical limitations described by the other witnesses without fear of regulatory scrutiny, and provides a predictable and simple legal environment that protects consumers without insulating entrenched market participants. To support these research and policy goals, I'd encourage Congress to contemplate commissioning a national blockchain commission that would aim to cement America's technological standing and increase economic growth and innovation. The commission could explore ways to invest in blockchain-based research through prizes or otherwise, devise common principles to guide the federal approach for regulating blockchain technology, hold hearings, conduct research, and make recommendations to industry, the executive branch, and Congress. Through the above approach, we can ensure that the U.S. remains the best place to develop, launch, and grow blockchain-based projects, and we can implement sensible and necessary guardrails to guide blockchain's development. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
I thank the witnesses. If I understand the blockchain technology, then it is going to be transformational. We're going to go to questions. I'm going to recognize myself for the first 5 minutes. And your testimony has helped. Being a physician that has used electronic medical records in the past, and to see their advantages, but certainly their disadvantages. I've got a hospital down the road, 6 miles, that I can't talk to with an EMR. This technology could certainly be eye-opening and certainly great for patient care. As a farm guy, I do believe that national security is food security and vice versa. And Mr. Giannis, your testimony as to the supply chain is very eye-opening for me. You know, I consider our farmers and ranchers our thin green line. And I think that may be our Achilles heel in this nation as far as our national security is concerned, is if we have a breach in our food security. I took some notes during your testimony, and I'm going to just ask a couple of questions. Mr. Jacaran and then Dr. Roman and Dr. Cuomo referenced that this system is tamper-proof, that it's immutable, that it can still continue to operate if bad actors are in place, that there has to be a private key, that quantum computers are doing all this fancy and light speed stuff. But I'm still concerned, how is anything, I mean, we know what happened with Bitcoin and how it was breached. How is it tamper-proof? And I'll go to you, Mr. Jacaran, first.
Yes, thank you for the question. When we discuss the tamper-proof attributes of blockchain, we're focusing on the mathematics behind it, that cryptographically we can trust that the identities that are saying they're conducting those transactions are, and that those transactions are being validated by other users on the blockchain. Additionally, once it is added to that ledger, it cannot be changed from that point forward without the other users on the blockchain knowing that it was, so that someone couldn't go back in time and alter a transaction and expect that to be reported as the truth.
So let me interrupt you. Could there be collusion between a group of users that could change the dynamics of the program?
Yes, sir. That is one of the risks, that a large group of users on the blockchain agree to conduct illegitimate transactions, and they have legitimate identities. So now they are manipulating what one may want to consider to be that one truth to benefit their transactions going forward. This is significantly easier on blockchains that are new, a little bit harder on blockchains that are already established, just because of the amount of data that would have to be manipulated.
So, Dr. Roman, is there any standards in place at this time that can prevent a collusion type event from occurring, or for private keys being breached in a manner where more than one could be breached?
Let me take those questions separately. The issue of subversion and changing of records, as Mr. Jacaran correctly states, would require, in most cases, the collusion of a majority of the participants involved, and that's going to be extremely difficult.
Well, I can see where in a Walmart situation where you have literally millions of people involved, that would be. But if you had a smaller group, I can see a potential issue there.
If you do have a smaller group, it is easier to do, but still likely to be visible to the entire community that a fork took place, and that an activity that went back in time, in essence, to change previous records took place. So it would be difficult to do it without detection, even in that case.
And I want to get to one more question. This is Mr. Giannis. Walmart's efforts utilizing blockchain technology and supply chain and data managers are very promising. I think they're on the cutting edge. With your success, do you see other industries or large corporations taking advantage of this technology?
Yeah, the response to our pilots have been really interesting. We've had companies from all over the world contact us with an interest in what we're doing, wanting to learn more, and actually wanting to participate. And so there's a growing body of interest, certainly within the food sector. It's really, really large. We also see other industries having an interest. For example, it has implications for sustainability. It has implications for food waste. And so we think it just has applications for supply chains in general.
Okay. And I'm out of time. Mr. Byer, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to first begin, ask for unanimous consent to introduce a letter from Congressman Polis for the record, who co-chairs the blockchain technology. Thank you. Dr. Roman, you talked about immutable, distributed, resilient. So I assume that the blockchain will exist in clouds throughout the world and computers throughout the world.
That's right.
Is the only thing that could disrupt it then is an electromagnetic pulse, or? Well,
That's certainly one catastrophic scenario that could jeopardize large segments. But in many cases, certainly for the public blockchains that are currently being used, the distribution would be difficult to track down geographically. I think it might be difficult to determine exactly where the entirety of the copies of the blockchain exist, and so finding a way to target the entire blockchain would be very, very difficult.
is it likely to exist in more than one place at a time then also?
For public chains, absolutely. This distributed nature is one of the strengths of the resilience of blockchains.
So as long as we have electricity, we're probably okay.
I think we're probably okay.
Okay, good. Mr. Jakaran, you wrote about mining and how you have to create incentives in the different ways that mining can go on. It conflicted a little bit with later testimony about that there wasn't need for mining on it. Is there going to be a continuous need for people to be going to Iceland and spending lots of electricity and computer resources to develop the next block in the blockchain?
The use of users mining for blockchain applies in a certain consensus model, particularly proof of work. If they have to solve a really difficult problem to show that this is a valid block on the chain. Other proofs of work may not require that. Proof of stake, a round-robin system where different users on the chain, it's just their turn to produce a block. These are based partially on the trust model that the users have amongst themselves, apart from the blockchain. So if I'm in a business community, I may already have a business relationship with other users, and I may be able to use some other proof of work model to develop that next block. Those other models take less power and maybe even be faster to post that next block. So partly it depends on the users involved as well as how they've developed the blockchain, what specific technologies they are choosing to use.
So the logical next question is, are blockchains infinite? Potentially.
I think the limitation to the blockchain would be the computational power you have to devote to it, how much storage you have, your bandwidth, your processing power.
They get ever longer, correct?
They can continue to grow, yes.
And does it then require ever more power to decrypt them, to read them, to?
Only to read them, no. Once it's posted, any user on the blockchain should have access, depending on the rules of the blockchain that was developed. To develop the next block, it should follow the same consensus model. If someone wanted to attack a much larger blockchain, though, that does get much more difficult.
Okay. Dr. Romine, you mentioned that the development of quantum computing and the ability to break up these cryptology. Can quantum computing be integrated into blockchain to make it ever more secure?
That's a fascinating question. I think one of the things that we are pursuing publicly, several months ago, we announced a competition essentially for what we call the post-quantum cryptography. That is, cryptographic algorithms that are secure even in the face of quantum computing and traditional computing. Once those algorithms are developed and promulgated, then yes, those algorithms would be able to replace the current public key crypto systems that are securing the blockchain and be more secure in a quantum world.
Okay, very cool. Mr. Wright, you talked about market-based or game theoretical mechanisms for reaching consensus. It's a very cool phrase, but what's it mean?
Yeah, I think it means the way that various different parties on the network decide that there's a valid block and that they want to add it to this underlying chain link of transactions. So, for example, for proof of work, you have to run this complex mathematical computation in order to prove that this is a valid block and it gets added to the chain. But you also have to pay fees that are related to it. So it's this dynamic between the mechanism with which you add information to the blockchain, along with the fees that are charged by members, particularly on public blockchains.
So they're not really reaching consensus on areas of disagreement. They're reaching consensus on the fact that this given block is valid,
exactly.
Or true, or
that it follows the protocol.
Okay. My time is up, but thank you very much.
Thank you. Great question. Ms. Comstock, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really, this has really been a fascinating hearing and topic, and thank you for holding this hearing. I was meeting with some folks last week on this about the caucus, so they did highlight they needed more diversity in the caucus, so I do plan on joining it, and thank you for highlighting the caucus too. In my opening statement, I referenced the Office of Personnel Management data breach and the OPM notifying us, and I was wondering if you could go into some more detail on how we could use that technology to better protect personal and sensitive data stored by the government. Sure.
So, Chairwoman Comstock, we are working with companies, as I referenced. One is SecureKey in Canada, and I think that's probably the furthest along to proving out digital identity on blockchain, as well as working with the Sovereign Foundation, who's working on digital identity protocol standards on blockchain. In the case in Canada, they've gathered a ecosystem of all the major banks, province of Ontario, British Columbia, and others, to form a digital rights management system is probably the best way I can word it, where citizens are the rightful owners of their data, and they basically, in a very simple interface that's not much more complicated than your Facebook app, I'll give permission. For example, if I go to a real estate company to rent an apartment, I'll give my bank and my DMV permission to answer any of the questions, almost like it's a music license. I'm giving them license to answer my question. And vice versa, I'm giving the folks answering the question the right to answer the question. And there are stipulations even in NIST talking about avoiding honeypots of data. And I think a lot of the major security breaches, it's a good idea not to put all your eggs in one basket. Mm-hmm. And one of the misnomers about using blockchain for identity is that you actually put personal identity information on the ledger. You don't. You put proofs and permissions. You put the digital rights on it. And it becomes almost a routing system for how you can have people interact with accountability on your identity information and making it far less visible. And last but not least, it's much harder to track your identity and usage. So there's stipulations about these things called triple blind data exchange, where the requester doesn't know who the provider is, the provider doesn't know who the requester is, and the network provider doesn't know either. And that makes it, again, very thorough to know, so that only the parties who need to know actually get to know.
Okay. Dr. Romine?
Yes, from my perspective, I think the important issue here is that as Mr. Cuomo mentioned, storing PII in the blockchain itself is not recommended. This is not something that you want to do. And the example that Mr. Jekaren used for access to medical records points that out. The medical records themselves still are retained on the private servers of the medical provider, but access management, access control, and auditability of access is provided through blockchain. So there are opportunities here to do some really interesting things in this space.
Okay, Mr. Jekaren?
Yes, ma'am. What may be particularly interesting is not the use of blockchain technology itself to protect sensitive data, but some of the technologies that underpin blockchain. So public-private key encryption, hashing, and particularly logging, so that we know when data is being used, we know who is accessing that data, and we know when data is being changed. Those technologies, particularly for very sensitive information that's not published to the blockchain, can certainly help protect data that we have today.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Comcott. Mr. Lipinski, 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's so much to really cover here and talk about and try to understand, but I think I want to get down to sort of whatever we can do in 5 minutes, get down to the question for us here is Congress doing enough to foster a coherent strategy regarding blockchain research, development, and a unified regulatory strategy or appropriate government guidelines on dealing with blockchain-based technologies? So I know we can't really cover that in 5 minutes, but let me start with Professor Wright, because I know you suggested that Congress initiate a national blockchain commission to address some of these issues. Can you just briefly expand a little bit on that? And I want to get some reaction to what you have to say.
Sure. So the idea with the Blockchain Commission would be to provide a degree of uniformity and a unified approach with regard to various different regulatory challenges that have emerged with regard to blockchain technology. You know, just from the statements from the
unifying across the government, or
right across the federal government.
Okay.
So you know, just some issues just raised by the witnesses' testimony today. There's privacy issues, identity management issues, key management issues, consumer protection. There's issues related to securities laws, commodities laws, and also issues related to the use of blockchain technology for currencies. And there's competing interpretations that have been issued already by various different federal agencies. So the thought would be to explore if we can have a common and unified guiding principles in order to ensure that the technology can develop in a mature way. We did this in part with the internet, where we just distilled down a couple guiding principles. And in part, some have commented that this is one of the reasons why so much internet-related innovation occurred here. I think it could be an opportunity, again, to look back to what we did when it came to internet policy back in the mid-1990s and apply that same idea to blockchain technology. And in addition, the other witnesses mentioned a number of different technological issues related to it, and a number of members in the private sector are trying to solve those issues. But any government support to address issues like scalability, issues related to developing quantum resilient blockchains, issues related to other technical limitations that are currently present with blockchains would be helpful and I think encouraged.
I ask our other witnesses, do you generally agree with that, or is there anything that you would disagree with that in terms of what the federal government should be doing? Mr. Jacqueline?
Sir, so what we see the federal government doing today is a variety of activities under the authority of that agency. So Mr. Romine talked about the NIST Blockchain Workshop, which is developing some use cases. We see that the Government Services Administration, GSA, is hosting other federal agencies to talk about potential applications of blockchain for government uses. Also, the Department of Homeland Security is issuing grants to try to overcome some of the issues surrounding blockchain to private industry to come up with solutions. Where we see this today is still in this test bed, trying to develop an understanding of technology, develop an understanding of how it can be applied, and then trying to develop a consensus amongst these tests. We have not yet seen a common federal, this is our path forward.
Mr. Cuomo?
Yeah, and I would also like to reiterate that there's some really good work being done by the Congressional Blockchain Caucus, right? And that's Representatives Polis and Schweikert. And we've had already one workshop around digital identity, and that had some really good outcomes. Next week, we have one on payments and one to follow later on supply chain. And particularly what that's doing, introducing members from NIST, IBM, was really informed by what the government was doing. It actually helped us on policy and interactions working with our clients, like with SecureKey in Canada, as well as that's where we met members from the Sovereign Foundation that really turned us on to some of the emerging standards. So those types of interactions are paying off by bringing government agencies and industry players together. So I want to encourage that.
Janice?
The only thing I wanted to add, I don't have specific advice, but just conceptually, you heard that we're scaling, testing, and learning together. So there's a lot of learning that's going on. And a lot of this is happening in the private sector. There's collaboration happening in a lot of private entities. The notion that maybe the public sector could participate in some of these tests, I think, would be very beneficial. One of the things we like to say is that blockchain truly democratizes the benefits. Everybody benefits. So if you think of the food examples I gave, not only will suppliers benefit, but regulators will too, being able to detect tracebacks. Consumers will. And so I would just recommend that they get involved in pick out the right agency to get involved in some of these pilots that are testing, scaling, and learning together.
Thank you. I'm out of time. I'll yield back.
Thank you. A fellow Louisianian, Mr. Higgins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the witnesses today. This is fascinating testimony. We certainly recognize the tremendous promise of blockchain technology in supply chains and throughout the private sector. I also recognize a great threat, potential threat in the government sector. I think we need to move forward very cautiously as we explore the broadened use of blockchain technology. The precise tracking of valuable items and inventory at the Walmart level is great. Everyone is within that sphere. There's a financial benefit for everyone involved within the blockchain. But to expand that technology into the government sector, you're dealing with bad actors across the world that could perhaps infiltrate that blockchain, it occurs to me, and know precisely, because of the accuracy, because of the very accuracy that you referred to, sir, in the Walmart example for tracking the mango slices in 2.2 seconds versus 7 days. That same technology would allow a bad actor tracking government secured inventories like weapons or uranium, et cetera, to the exact location. So I'm concerned about the verification. Mr. Jacaran, you referred to authorized entities. How would we know? Explain to us, help us grasp how the digital or virtual identity versus the actual identity of a blockchain user is verified. How do we know that a bad actor does not have possession of a private key? How do we know a private key has been stolen until the damage has been done?
Thank you, sir. As Mr. Romine has discussed earlier, many of the cases that we hear of Bitcoin being stolen is because a private key has been taken and used. So in many examples we've seen to date, we do not know if a private key has been stolen and used. We find out about that transaction after it has posted. For some of the more sensitive supply chain concerns, the implementations of blockchain that may be used for that are permissioned and private, meaning that not anyone can join that blockchain and not every person on that blockchain will have access to all the rights on that blockchain. So there is a level of control that then governs who has access to the data, who can publish the data, and who then can transact in that data.
That's very promising, I believe, for the private sector and potentially for the government sector. I see a public-private partnership emerging as this technology emerges. I'm concerned about quantum computing. Dr. Romine, you referred to in your submitted testimony a public key and a private key that are mathematically related to each other, and that the Federal Information Systems Processing Standards specifies elliptic curve digital signature algorithms, which is a common algorithm for digital signing using blockchain technologies, and yet we're concerned about protecting that algorithm from quantum computing. And you referred to that this is leading the global effort to ensure that that encryption is available to industry prior to the emergence of quantum computing. But how would we know that quantum computing has emerged until we have observed its interaction with blockchain technologies?
That's a very good question, Congressman. I think the issue here is there's a general recognition that there's a lot of investment around the world in the attempt to develop quantum computing. I think the general consensus here is that it is still a significant number of years away from maturity until we reach what we call a cryptographically relevant computer, quantum computer. The day that happens, I agree with you, I doubt that there's going to be, at least potentially, there may not be a headline around the world that says we've now crossed from a non-quantum computer state into a quantum computer state. It may be that some of the people developing that technology would like to use it before it becomes public. But our goal is to try to move with alacrity in the development of quantum-resistant cryptography so that we are ready in the event that that day occurs.
You stated the number of years. Can you give us the idea of a window, sir?
The estimates vary. Publicly available estimates vary anywhere from 15 to 30 years. I don't really know. It could be shorter than that if there are dramatic dramatic improvements in technological advance that we can't really predict right now.
I thank you for that answer, sir, and thank you all for testifying today.
Thank you, Mr. Higgins. Mr. McNerney, 5 minutes.
Well, I thank the chairman for holding the hearing, and thank the witnesses. Back to the present. Mr. Jackran, in your testimony, you raised the issue of how an attacker has the ability to compromise users' private encryption keys. Have there been any instances of blockchain compromising?
Yes, sir. When you hear cases of someone stealing Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies, what likely happens is that that user's computer that hosted that private key was compromised, or that private key was somehow taken from that user, so that the bad guy could then perform a transaction transferring that digital asset to themselves.
So it's a matter of data hygiene or some way to protect yourself from those kind of losses.
The risk here is similar to any other kind of data loss. You want to ensure that your machine or the network that you're hosting that information on has proper security measures in place.
Well, thank you. Mr. Romine, could you give us an update on developing blockchain technology standards and having those standards adopted by industry?
Sure. The first effort that we did was to publish a general guideline to blockchain that I alluded to in my testimony. That isn't so much a standards development activity as it is a means of providing a common vocabulary for people to use when they talk about blockchain. Our engagement, as you know, in the United States, in general, standards development occurs in the private sector. We at NIST, as the nation's standards organization for the federal government, we participate vigorously in many of those activities, and the ones that we're participating in now include work that's going on with the International Organization for Standardization and the Insights Committee that we use in that effort, OASIS, IEEE, the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, our ANSI colleagues and others as well. So we're participating in technical committees and subcommittees in the blockchain arena today.
Well, I know that Walmart's developing standards for its own use. Is there any chance that those standards would be, because Walmart's a big organization, their standards would be adopted, you know, over a broad range of applications before standards have been accepted in the government?
Certainly one of the things that can happen is as de facto standards emerge or a substantial part of the private sector begins to adopt a specific standard, those standards can ultimately be brought to these standards bodies and either adopted or modified as at need.
Sure, thank you. Mr. Cuomo, in your testimony you noted that there are currently trusted digital identity projects underway in Canada. Could you give us a little bit more about those projects? Are they government-led, and exactly what do they entail?
So in Canada, there's a company called SecureKey that we're working with, and they're a small company that offered a service for citizens to use any of their bank IDs, user IDs and passwords to log into government services like motor vehicle, taxation department, et cetera. So eliminating propagation of user ID and password. However, based on further examination, they thought they can do better, and with encouragement from all parties involved, decided to try blockchain, and not just any blockchain, but I mentioned in my testimony a new breed of blockchain, which is what we call a permission blockchain, which brings accountability and ability to surface and surf through regulations and be able to adhere to existing regulations. So we worked with them, the banks and the government agencies, to implement a system called Verified Me. It was the mobile application that I mentioned before. It is about to go into pilot right now. Banks are building applications on it for increasing the efficiency of onboarding clients while doing their KYC and AML processes and streamlining those. And in general, giving citizens back the rightful control of their identity, but also using established companies and institutions to kind of be their friends, like in Facebook when you would friend someone. So you can turn to any of the existing relationships you have, like with your DMV, and you can allow them to attest to your identity. Right? So this is underway. We are about to enter pilot into that system. There are companies in the U.S. looking at that as well. It's been heavily influenced by many of the standards that my friend to the right of me have helped bring forward around data privacy.
Thank you. Mr. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. McMurray. Mr. Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think what is most incredible to me is how much of this is developed without over-regulation from the federal government. And I guess I would direct my questions at Mr. Cuomo and Mr. Yanis. What are you most, from a more of a broader perspective, what are you most concerned about? Where can the government really screw this up, the continued development of this technology? Mr. Yanis?
My initial impression to that question is maybe becoming overly prescriptive. There's a lot of innovation that's happening right now, and I think we ought to let the innovation play out. As I mentioned, I think there's opportunities for the public and private sector to do this testing and scaling and learning together, but if we start getting too prescriptive early, I think we'll stifle innovation.
Have you seen specific examples?
I have not seen any examples of that. In fact, in contrast, what we've heard is from some of our federal partners, CDC, FDA, with an interest in what we're doing and learning how they might play a role or benefit. So I haven't experienced that in the area of food.
Mr. Cuomo?
I further add to that, as I mentioned, there is a new form of blockchain that is more suitable for business and government applications around permission blockchain versus with Bitcoin, where you have open networks that are self-governed with a permission blockchain. While the networks could be open, they are governed by steering committee members, right? So it's, again, I think it's more controlled. It's working in a more controlled environment. So again, distancing any regulations and policy that are being levied against, currency-oriented blockchain to this new breed, I think, is important to keep that separation because there's an immense amount of innovation that can and will happen beyond cryptocurrency. So we really want to encourage the look at that. A, and B, there are many governments who are indulging in, I would say, less risky blockchain projects, whether it's digital driver's license, land registry, things of that nature. So you got to be in it to win it. And I think trying out some low-risk projects, learning from those, and participating more, I would say, with more tempo once you get those under your belt is what we'd recommend.
So both of you would agree, I think, that what this hearing is all about, that we've benefited from the development of this technology without government overreach, without regulation, and you in the private sector are especially seeing the benefit of that. But both of you would agree with that?
I would agree with that.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Perlmutter, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. And to the panel, this is great. Mr. Yanis, I want to start with you. Your little example, which isn't so little, of 7 days to 2.2 seconds on your supply chain on the mangoes, just the possibilities for government, but other industries are tremendous. So I was just thinking about in Colorado. So we've had a lot of oil and gas development. Now we've got real estate, the suburbs growing into what were old oil and gas fields, and we're not quite sure where all the pipes are. Mining, what's coming out of the mine. To be able to go back from an environmental standard or from a real estate standard and track this in a such a expeditious manner.
Right.
So what other industries are you guys working with besides the food industry? I know that's your specialty, but are there other industries in your collaboration or your consortium?
In our consortium, there is not. This is a food consortium, but let me just real briefly, if I could say, the difference between 7 days and 2.2 seconds, it's a big difference. On the one hand, not just speed. On the one hand, imagine if you just pull all of the mangoes, if they were, associated with an event, because you don't know the source. That's 7 days of lost sales, 7 days of food waste, 7 days of small farmers' livelihoods being destroyed. Eventually to say, oops, your mangoes weren't affected. On the other hand, if you don't pull them, that's a lot of potential illnesses, hospitalizations, even deaths. But we know that there are other areas of interest within Walmart and outside of Walmart. We see interest in the pharmaceutical industry, obviously. Anything that's supply chain related. We see interest in sustainability sectors. You know, how can we manage supply chains so that they're more sustainable? Health and wellness. I think it's endless. The people that are interested.
I really, the possibilities are endless here, and that's what's so exciting about this. Dr. Romine, I want to thank you and NIST for being engaged in this, and for, you know, it's a frontier. It's the Wild West in some respects, which is great. And to ultimately have some standards which kind of rein in the Wild West nature of it a little bit. I'm kind of coming where Mr. Higgins was coming from, though. I serve on another committee, which is terrorism and illicit finance. And, you know, maybe I've watched too many Mission Impossibles, but when I hear words tamper-proof, immutable, can't be hacked, I'm thinking, you know, Tom Cruise is out there someplace, and he's coming up with a way to do it. So talk to us a little bit more about this, the quantum computing element of this, and Mr. Jakaran, you know, for both of you, because, you know, that's something I need to understand, because we deal with a lot of hacking and cybersecurity issues in my other committee.
So I'll start just by saying the backbone of everything that we're talking about here is cryptography, and NIST has been involved in cryptographic standards for more than 45 years. It's a backbone of our cybersecurity program and something about which we're fiercely proud, the track record that we have there. The idea that we would sit back and wait for the advent of quantum computing to render our public key infrastructure impotent is something we can't live with. And so some years ago we initiated and much more recently announced the competition that I alluded to for quantum resistance, so that we will be prepared in the event that quantum computing does render our current crypto systems ineffective. We will have, long before that happens, we will have replacements available so that we can continue to use cryptography to underpin a trustworthy information technology environment.
Thank you for the question, sir. So when we talk about the data on a blockchain being immutable and auditable, we're really saying that we trust the math, not necessarily the data that a user entered. So in the supply chain example—
But information's required.
But information is required to input, but it's that cryptography that we trust, that we say, yes, this must be valid. There are pitfalls there. So I discussed earlier user collusion. You could have a user physically tamper with a tracker in the supply chain, and other users agree that that's going to be tampered, so that what appears in the record appears to be true, but is actually somehow altered. And that might inhibit our ability to track it going forward. With quantum, I talked about business, legal, and technology that would be applied. If you're using weak crypto as one of the specific technologies that's being applied, that can be overcome by high-performance computing or quantum computing, and that's one of the risks that those choosing to implement blockchain, or any technology really, must consider before they move forward.
Well, I want to thank you all. I've got a million questions about cryptocurrencies, but this is really an outstanding panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ms. Bonamici, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This is a fascinating discussion, and I really appreciate all the witnesses who are here today. I know that this technology and its applications are clearly evolving very rapidly, and I appreciate the opportunity to learn more and to hear from you and about some of the opportunities and the challenges. I'm curious about a couple of things. First of all, the potential applications of blockchain technology in voting systems. Could any of you, maybe Professor Wright and Mr. Jakaran, am I close? Could you elaborate on how blockchain might play a role in making our elections more secure and trustworthy? I had the opportunity a couple of years ago to visit Estonia with the then chairman of the Education Committee, Chairman Klein, and we had some interesting conversations about what they're doing. What can we learn from Estonia, because they have, of course, e-voting, iVoting. They've done some pilots even with shareholder voting. So what are the potentials there, and how could blockchain make our elections more secure and trustworthy? Mr. Wright?
Thank you very much for the question. So the idea here is blockchains can store many different types of data, including potentially data related to voting. And there's been a significant amount of research over the past couple years thinking about whether or not blockchains can actually be used as a way to improve voting in a couple different capacities. For public voting systems, the anonymity that's probably required for these systems to operate is not there yet. But at least for votes and voting mechanisms where the parties do not need to be anonymous, there's been some strides that have been made from researchers. So for example, the thought would be in the corporate setting where shareholders don't necessarily need to keep their identity anonymous. They can record their votes on a blockchain, and then you can use more of these autonomous processes called smart contracts in order to just tally them up automatically. So you have an auditable trail of all the votes, and then you can use additional logic in order to improve the efficiency of these voting processes. So
I don't mean to interrupt, but with regard to anonymity, a significant portion of the population in Estonia does vote by iVoting, and it is anonymous. So does anybody know how they do that then, if you're concerned about anonymity?
Ma'am, so one way of implementing a blockchain, remember this is just a ledger of transactions, is to not record the vote itself, but record the identity of a voter having taken that action. So you could use the public-private key encryption to say this person, this identity, has voted today at this place, but then the vote itself is not stored on the blockchain at all. The vote itself is held on some other secure system. So the voter voting is registered in the same way we would as in a poll book, but the vote of that voter is still anonymous.
Thank you. Fascinating. Can you talk a little bit about how we in the United States compare, both in terms of, and I appreciate the work of NIST. I know you're still open for public comment on your report, but how do we compare with other countries and our advancements in this field and in developing a workforce that will be required to work in blockchain technologies? Dr. Romaine?
I don't have specifics about other countries' activities with respect to blockchain specifically. We do know that there's a lot of activity in the area of cryptography around the world, and we're a leader in the United States. We're a leader in cryptography as a result of the activities of, at least in part, my organization. I'm very proud of that. As I alluded to in my testimony, we're leading the world in the development of quantum-resistant cryptography as a result of this global competition that we've launched, and we've gotten a lot of interest and participation around the world.
And can I ask before my time expires, could you talk a little bit about the possibility of, with the test beds that are available with NIST, the possibility of the federal government hosting other test beds and the ability for other researchers to use those test beds, federally funded researchers?
Sure. We are not really operating so much as a user facility in this particular case, but we're always happy to talk to anyone about collaboration with us. If there are people who are interested in working with us on the development of mechanisms for testing out blockchain technologies, we're happy to discuss that with anyone who would like to reach out to us.
Thank you. And as I yield back, I want to thank Mr. Cuomo for inventing the someone is typing indicator, which I find very useful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you. Dr. Marshall, 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'll start with Mr. Yanis. Mr. Yanis, I represent an agriculture district, and one of the big advantages that Kansas farmers, American farmers have, well, actually there's several. One is their ingenuity, their hard work. Number two is our infrastructure allows us to get our goods to market as efficient as anybody. But the third thing is I think we have an incredible food safety and quality that would compete with anybody in the world. So we're excited here. You're using this technology. And I think would even give our farmers even a bigger advantage if you knew that we had consistent, better quality. So as you're making this transition to this, how do you see as food quality going to influence the purchase where Walmart's going to be purchasing its goods from?
Well, it's just allowing us to be much more informed where the product's coming from and how it's being produced and how it flows. The benefits could be from increased assurances that the product's been produced safely, authenticity, the ability to track and trace products. It's the anonymity that often allows some people to do unscrupulous behaviors in the supply chain with things such as economically motivated adulteration. But we've talked to farmers, and in terms of the stakeholder groups in the food system, farmers are probably one of the most important stakeholder groups that we want to hear from. And the initial read that we're getting is very positive. Farmers, when there is a food scare, are often falsely incriminated, and their crops are damaged, and so this allows them to clear their good name faster. Farmers take a lot of pride in how they produce products. It gives them the ability potentially to have a voice or a face with the customer, and so we are going to try to design a solution that's very sensitive to the farmer's needs.
Anybody else want to comment on food safety? Mr. Cuomo, go ahead.
Yes. One of the things that I think is important is the convergence of technologies. Blockchain is certainly I think a transformative technology, but there are other, I would say, cousins out there like Internet of Things and AI, and especially in like supply chain, taking the physical good and digitizing it on an immutable ledger, I think is really important. In my written testimony, I talk about some research that IBM is doing in a snap-on to an iPhone camera lens that does a spectral analysis. So, for example, if you take a picture of a vial of oil coming out of a Shell oil plant at the origin of the plant versus the at the pump, let's say, you can actually see the digital fingerprint as it was originally at the factory versus what you're seeing, and maybe you might find out that it has been watered down a little bit. So you can imagine physically digitizing an important complementary technology to blockchain and similar to AI, we're doing things with our Watson technology, for example, in diamond provenance with a company called Everledger to interpret and ingest the obligations of a very thick piece of regulation called the Kimberley Act, which is here to protect us all around proper processes around diamond mining. And what they're doing is they're using a smart contract to ensure that the diamond certificates all follow the rules of the Kimberley Act. So these cousins, I think, are also very important to supply chain. They can work very well together.
Well, we're excited to see the continued advancements in AI that you're having without us regulating you, over-regulating that process yet. So we're excited about that. I want to turn to health records. So I'm a physician as well. And one of my biggest struggles as we went through meaningful use for the hospital as well as physicians' practices is I explained it like this. I felt like the hospital had a Chevy. I had a Ford. The doctors, the orthopods across town had a Cadillac, and they wouldn't talk to each other. Or maybe one was in Spanish and one was in French and one was Greek or something. How do you all see this solving that dilemma where maybe love to hear more about the patients having control of their own records. Is it going to help solve this problem where we have 10, 20 different computer systems out there that speak different languages? I'm not sure who's our healthcare specialist. Go ahead.
Thank you for the question. In this example, and I speak about it in my testimony as well, providers maintain that health record in a manner that is consistent with federal and state law.
Sure.
So there's still a variety of systems in use. What the blockchain may publish is permissions to that record. So rather than a patient having to drive across town to pick up a disk of that health record to take it over to their next provider, providers could see that a permission for access to that record has been published to this blockchain, and then providers could then talk amongst themselves to transfer that record. This still comes with some pitfalls. One, all the providers have to be on the same blockchain, so they all have some kind of identity, a public and private key. And users have to take a more active role in managing that record for themselves.
But do you think this solves, right now what's happening in doctor's offices, I literally have to send it to them, they print it and copy it, and then they paste it into their record. Do you think this will solve that problem?
It is a potential technology that can be applied to that problem. Whether or not it solves it, it depends to be seen on its specific application.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Marshall. Ms. Esty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and my apologies. This is one of those multi-hearing days and meeting days. But I did appreciate that question on health records because I just came from a meeting with Secretary Shulkin at the VA, and one of the topics we were discussing is exactly how do we deal with medical records, and do we have a better way of dealing with that? So I'll be interested to follow up. Blockchain technology has the potential to make game-changing transformations to our digital economy and financial security. We're seeing countries like China and Switzerland who are front and center in developing an innovative hub for blockchain technology. Zug, Switzerland, known as Crypto Valley, is home to an institution that targets the development of blockchain and virtual currency startups. Last year, China launched the trusted Blockchain Open Lab to support the application of blockchain technology across various sectors. Mr. Wright, in your testimony, you recommended to Congress to establish a national blockchain commission in order to drive blockchain innovation through prizes or otherwise in the United States. Can you point to current innovative hubs or economies that favor blockchain development, and what are the characteristics that make those hubs favorable to blockchain development, and how could a national commission replicate those best practices?
Thank you very much for the question. So the innovation hubs are fortunately still in the United States. So there's a tremendous amount of activity in New York. There's a tremendous amount of activity, obviously, in the Bay Area. And that's really being driven by the private sector. So I do think that we're actually on great ground when it comes to the innovation occurring here. But I do think that there's a number of technical and legal limitations that could either enhance or inhibit the technology going forward. And the idea would be to pinpoint areas where we need to shore up and provide additional research. So one area that hasn't been addressed yet is for these autonomous computer processes known as smart contracts. They have a number of different bugs and different problems emerging with them. It would be great to provide research for formal verification so that we can understand this new computing paradigm, issues related to quantum computing, et cetera. I think if we can provide that research, we can ensure that the private sector then can take the learnings from that research and bring it to the public.
And who do you think is best positioned to be conducting that? Who do you see as overseeing that? Obviously, there's an enormous demand for talent, and we don't have the talent pool to fill all of those demands. So we're going to be having to compete with agencies that are already trying to recruit these same researchers and the same talent pool.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And blockchain technology, and some have analogized it to being as impactful, if not more impactful, than the internet. So it hits a number of different industries. It hits a number of different sectors. So I think if we were to take this approach, it would require multiple stakeholders to become involved, to think about it. Academia obviously could play a huge role here as well through grants or other ways to fund innovation.
I mean, you mentioned prizes. Do you see this as grants or prizes? Obviously, there's, again, you may have noticed our budgets are a little tight here. The research budgets in the President's proposal are being cut across many different agencies. There are very few that are getting plussed up. VA and Defense Department about the only ones. Does that suggest it ought to be in DARPA? I mean, where would we park such an initiative practically? Who's got the expertise, and where do we think they would be best positioned to move forward?
So with regard to prizes, that was mentioned because it actually complements what's organically happening in the private sector. A number of different projects that are examining and exploring blockchain technology in the private sector have already implemented bounty programs or different ways to try to solve some of the technical issues. So I think the government would complement what's already emerging in the private sector. With regard to where it's housed, I would defer to the wisdom of this subcommittees in order to determine that appropriately.
Anyone else want to weigh in on that? Yeah, Mr. Cuomo.
Yeah, just reflecting on one of the recommendations, which was to thoughtfully insert blockchain into projects already funded. And I think there is some good funding going on today, and we can leverage that. And I pointed out in my testimony the Small Business Innovation Research Program. I think tacking on to and encouraging within the context of already funded, I think is a great idea, as well as the National Blockchain Commission.
Anyone else with other thoughts? Yes.
Something Congress may want to consider when thinking about where to park blockchain is to divide up blockchain for its intended use. Are you interested in supply chain management for food safety? That might lend itself to one agency versus the international shipping of blockchain and something coming into our ports. That may make it appropriate for another agency. So rather than look at the technology itself, the application of the agency and the expertise of that agency may drive where that particular implementation would reside.
Thank you, appreciate, although I will note with that, the shortage of the workforce makes that hard to do because then you're going to have that capacity in lots of different agencies. And frankly, right now, with our efforts to support a STEM workforce, we know we don't have what we need right now, and we've got cybersecurity issues, defense as well as offense that we're also trying to recruit for. So that is aspirational, but perhaps not realistic right now to be able to park this in each of the agencies, although I think it does make a great deal of sense. Thank you. Now I yield back.
Dr. Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate my ability to sit in on this committee. So now, actually, you've had the opportunity to be questioned not only by the only PhD mathematician, but also the only PhD physicist in the U.S. Congress. So I won't go too deeply into the nuts and bolts of quantum computing in the interest of time. But I guess my question is probably mostly for Mr. Wright. Digital contracts seem like they're really an area where this could be transformative. And it seems to me there are two classes of these, one where you need a governing body that can break the contracts under some circumstances, and one where you're comfortable just letting the digital process play out. And I was wondering if you've thought about the classes of problems that can be solved by those two.
Sure. Thank you for the question. One of the emerging use cases for blockchain technology is to memorialize parts of legal agreements in code, in software. So instead of having a natural language agreement, you would have all or portions of that agreement memorialized in some sort of software-based system. Smart contracts are unique, particularly on public blockchains, in their ability to run autonomously across a number of different computers at the same time. So that means you could potentially preclude them from terminating at some point in time. But at the same time, they're software, so you can program them in different ways, including ways to halt or terminate them. The real fundamental value for these smart contracts when it comes to legal arrangements is that blockchains have proven, at least in the public setting, to be pretty exemplary and exceptional in securing digital assets of different various stripes, including virtual currencies and representations of physical and or other digital assets. And you can use these programs to seamlessly transfer them. So for example, in the project that I mentioned that I'm working on called Open Law, we were able to model out an employee offer letter. In the employee offer letter, instead of it articulated a payment schedule, and instead of getting paid every 2 weeks, you could get paid every minute. Right, and we can plug into that a smart contract that could actually remit tax payments automatically, assuming that the government was willing to accept tax payments in virtual currency. And that obviously is a proof of concept, but I think it points to a future where our commercial relationships are much more dynamic, and it represents a really new frontier for how we think about commercial arrangements.
Yeah, and yet if you found that the employee made fraudulent presentations in their application for the job, you need something like a court that has to go back and be able to digitally break this digital contract so the payments don't happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the consensus is emerging that we'll have agreements that are written in natural language that only reference these smart contract programs, and of course courts would be able to administer them if there's a dispute. And on top of that, there'll be technical safeguards that would be put in place so that the parties could terminate the performance obligation during the course of performance.
Okay, so these sound like quite complex things, even to accomplish something simple.
Yeah, I think they're complex, but over time they should simplify and then could have a broad range of impact.
Yeah, or perhaps standardize, remain complex, but have the standardized boilerplate and a small amount of customized But it's fascinating. Let's see, there are a couple of near-term things. Land registries using blockchain are being pursued by a handful of countries that I'm familiar with. And several countries are talking about issuing fiat currencies. So these are not like, Bitcoin where it just floats and has no intrinsic value. This would be something where the government treasury would guarantee to accept them for payment in taxes or give you a real cash dollar back. And so that they wouldn't, they'd be solid. And I was wondering what are the near-term status of either of those, or whoever is most familiar with land registry efforts, for example? Mr.
This is a great question. So the idea here, again, is to record information related to title to property or deeds to property on a blockchain. In the U.S., obviously, the land title recordation system is quite fractured, so it would require a lot of coordination between various different state and county level officials in order to build these types of systems. But that's the promise. The promise is we can begin to record evidence of ownership on a blockchain and potentially develop a set of technologies that could become standardized not just here, but across the globe. So imagine a possibility of actually being able to transfer property regardless of jurisdictional boundaries. In much the same way when it comes to digital fiat currencies or digitized fiat currencies, there's been a number of efforts in order to explore this plane. There's been efforts by Singapore. I think recently there was an effort announced by Israel.
So they're actually functioning fiat currencies?
I think it's in the proof of concept stage, but the thought is to represent traditional fiat currency in a digitized form and to replicate some of the innovations that we've seen with cryptocurrencies.
In terms of the supply chain application, it seems like the big beneficiary may be offshore places where the supply chain is sort of shaky, and that we currently have a competitive advantage in the U.S. is that we have, USDA and so on monitoring the ag supply chain. And I was wondering if that's something that you'd agree with or think that.
I think there's opportunities in very developed supply chains. We see food safety scares happening in very developed nations, and so the benefits there apply. We know that very small tweaks or improvements in supply chains result in big benefits, and so we think the idea of a digitized food system coupled with artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things will allow us to run smarter, more efficient supply chains. So I think the benefits are for the food system is global in nature. I think the entire food system can benefit.
All right, thank you, and yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Foster. We've got a couple of members that want to follow-up questions, so we're going to be concise. We've got limited time. Mr. Higgins, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jaikaran, in your testimony, you described blockchain as not being a panacea technology or not appropriate solution for every industry or company and its management of data. Other than the ability to edit, inability to edit transactions, and I'm going to ask you, is that correct?
Well, that might be one way, but yes, blockchain adds.
Other than the inability to edit transactions, what are some of the risks of using a blockchain to record vital information and data? And I'm thinking within the governmental sector specifically.
Sure. Thank you for the question, sir. So in a government implementation, one of the big challenges with government is the user base. The user base is dispersed. Unlike private sector, that users and businesses might align, and in this particular example, on technical savviness, government doesn't get to choose the technical savviness of its user base. So one of the bigger risks here is something we've already discussed, that a user loses their key, and their ability to then transact on that public identity becomes a challenge. So in addition to data not being able to be edited previously in the chain if a record was inserted inappropriately or inaccurately, the ability for a user to then conduct a new transaction might be difficult. Those are just two in briefly explaining it.
What's your opinion regarding the inability to edit? It occurs to me, for instance, regarding the Freedom of Information Act or public records request at the state or local level. If a blockchain, if the data within a blockchain cannot be edited, how can it be redacted?
That could be a potential problem. This goes back to, I discussed three attributes: business, legal, and technical. This might be both a legal and a business case when one is considering applying blockchain technology. does that entity absolutely need an uneditable ledger of transactions? The other side to that is maybe there's data that they do not publish to that blockchain, that the data is actually held on some other system that can be edited, but the record of that transaction, the record of that document being made, or whatever that transaction might be, not all these transactions are financial, that is then published to the blockchain so that there's some knowledge of it.
I don't think we've touched on that yet in this hearing. So there can be a marriage between a more secured system that's isolated from a blockchain and a blockchain system. Mr. Cuomo, would you comment on that, sir?
Yes, we've implemented several systems that enable right to be forgotten by marrying exactly what you said together, two systems. One is a secure data store where a document or piece of information is encrypted, and then a fingerprint or digital hash of that document is then placed on the blockchain. So what is being redacted is not the information, but the cookie crumb that you put on the blockchain stays, right? So there's still a evidence that something happened.
So
right?
potentially,
but the information could be deleted outside. Yeah.
So potentially, a government system could be developed that would allow for the dissemination of public data through public information requests or freedom of information requests, and still allow that government entity at the local, state, or federal level to redact data.
Yes.
All right, Mr. Cuomo, you stated in your written testimony that an enterprise blockchain network is fault tolerant. Can you briefly elaborate for us on that, please?
So in an enterprise blockchain like the Hyperledger Fabric, it's a modular architecture that supports a variety of consensus algorithms, and modern computer science supports a number of such algorithms that are fault tolerant, and one of them is the Byzantine fault tolerant algorithm that is emulated from the Byzantine general problem, which is back in the day, I guess, a general couldn't trust all his messengers, so he had to ensure that his orders were carried out even in the presence of bad actors. So MIT and others formulated algorithms that allow the operation of the general order to occur even in the presence of some couriers that may be, bad actors.
Fascinating. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Higgins. Mr. Byer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jacaron, how do you pronounce it?
Jacaran.
Jacaran, yeah. In your written testimony, you say, quote, under key security, if the user's hard drive fails, which mine failed last year, so, or they forget or otherwise lose their private key, which is describing my wife, they effectively lock the resource tied to their public key forever, inhibiting any other transaction with that asset. Is there not a danger if you've built up this blockchain that's gone on for years and is very long and somebody loses the private key?
Yes, that's precisely the example that I'm trying to articulate in my written testimony, yeah. That there is a danger there.
It sounds like a big danger. I'm trying to think about how, if in my business I've spent years building a blockchain to record this immutable ledger of certain asset transfers, all of a sudden it's lost forever. Mr. Cuomo.
Yeah, nothing is foolproof. However, there are things you can do. For example, on the IBM blockchain as a service that implements this enterprise blockchain, we allow members of that participating in that blockchain to store their keys in a crypto vault, right? Also, we enable governance to happen around. So you may choose not to join a network where one of the other members are not using such a vault. Right? If they're just storing their keys on a laptop, you may not say, well, the risk is too high for me to join. So governors of an enterprise blockchain could set the rules that could help mitigate sloppiness or carelessness like that. Won't eliminate it, but can help set a set of standards that would eliminate those sorts of problems.
If you and I had a blockchain that we had built together for years, and I lost my key, is that my private key, does that then deny you access to it also?
the transactions that you and I are involved with are in jeopardy, because if whoever has your key can now see the transactions that you and I had conducted.
Okay, great. All right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Mr. Latimer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize for coming in late. I actually was in another committee hearing dealing with data security and financial services, and it just happened to be two areas of key interest of mine are going on at the same time. I've often said recently that blockchain technology, in my opinion, of having 30 years in the IT industry, is a potential solution to our cybersecurity risk that we have, which are significant and real. My concern is that the federal government, especially from the regulatory side, is always afraid of adopting something new because they don't understand it. And I'm seeing a lot of fear even among some of my colleagues because they're equating the technology behind cryptocurrency as the cryptocurrency itself. And I think this is something that we need to look at, we need to consider as a potential solution to our cybersecurity challenges we have right now. Mr. Cuomo, am I off base with that, or do you think that this is a potential solution? The technology, the blockchain technology, is a solution.
I mean, it's not a silver bullet, but it's certainly used in the right places could help in a significant way. We talked about digital identity, and I think that's core to so many industries and government. So getting a handle in the right areas, not having honeypots of data, doing digital rights management where end users could actually manage their own data versus keeping it under one house, one honeypot. I think that will go a long way. It won't eliminate the problem, but it'll change the attack surface.
Well, the way I've always looked at cybersecurity is it's impossible, as I think you said earlier, it's impossible to have an ultimately secured system. In fact, I remember when I was in the military and intelligence, a set of standards were set out. The standards are so stringent that once the system was built to actually meet the security standards, it was unusable because it was so slow. I mean, there's two aspects of cybersecurity I've looked at. When I had my private business in the IT realm, we looked at security in the way of you can't ultimately secure yourself. It's to make it harder for the bad guy to get your data. It was like the two Georgians went hiking in Alaska, and a grizzly bear started chasing them. One of them sat down and put on his tennis shoes. The other one said, "You can't outrun the bear." He said, "I don't have to. I just have to outrun you." That's kind of the way cybersecurity is, to make you harder than the other guy. And that's where I see the blockchain is it isn't the silver bullet, but it does make it much more difficult to find the honeypot. And in our environment today, and I have issues with the honeypots as well, not only is there a honeypot, but because of our interest in data backup, we have multiple honeypots sitting out in clouds. And if you get into one, it's not that hard to backdoor to get into another one somewhere. The other aspect of cybersecurity, and if anybody is welcome to weigh in on this one, is one of the areas we overlook is a key principle we had when I was in the military, which was you do not have to secure what you don't have. It's the amount of data that we are keeping, sometimes that the government, through regulation, forcing businesses to keep data that isn't that valuable, they don't need to keep, or the government forcing industry to report data to the government, which, in my opinion, the government's the highest risk of anybody out there. Is that something that we should be addressing, is the amount of data that we're requiring businesses to and entities to keep on individuals? Anybody can weigh in on that one.
Well, from the NIST perspective, our cybersecurity approach has always been management of risk, something I know from your background you understand very well. And in this case, what you alluded to, this idea of data minimization, is one aspect of managing risk. There's no question that is an appropriate tool. Other tools involve, excuse me, management of privacy risk, the idea of trying to ensure that you've satisfied the 5 functions that we talk about in the cybersecurity framework: the identify your assets, protect them, detect when they've been compromised or attacked, respond to that, and then have a plan for recovery in the event that a breach actually occurs. Okay. So it's risk management is our approach.
Well, I think to get to where we need to be is going to take a culmination of a lot of things, but I continue to see that the blockchain technology, because of how it disperses the data, I know there's some challenges, especially when it comes to law enforcement and some other aspects, but I think we do not need to be afraid of the new technology, but figure out how to adopt it. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. I recognize Mr. Palmer, who I understand is yielding to Dr. Foster.
Yes. All right. Thank you. I appreciate that, Mr. Palmer. Let's see. One of the claims that's made about blockchain is that it's going to really solve a lot of the privacy problems, and probably the most direct, one of the biggest worries there are individual medical records. And could you walk me through how that might work? It seems to me that, you know, even if you authenticate yourself to a doctor and he pulls your medical record, they exist in plain text, unencrypted, on his computer. If his computer is hacked, it's kind of game over, and that your medical records will be for sale on the dark web in short order. And is there any blockchain-based solution to that fundamental problem of, you know, having your endpoint machine hacked, your cell phone hacked, at the point that the user actually pulls up the clear, direct data?
Right. Thank you for the question, sir. So in the example that I talk about in my testimony of the provider maintaining that record, the record itself is still relying on the security measures of the provider. So if the provider is not implementing defense in depth or some other cybersecurity strategies, and an attacker, instead of attacking the blockchain, attacks the data store of the provider, the record is still vulnerable. That would be the case today.
Yeah, but there's no potential blockchain-based solution to that problem. If the terminal that you're displaying the data on has been hacked, you're sunk.
Not in any of the blockchain examples that I've seen implemented to date.
Okay, yeah, so that's, let's see, this is a question, I guess, relating to NIST and all of the classified activity that we put a lot of taxpayer money into. Is there anything you can say about the level at which you communicate, say, the state of the art of quantum computing, which is very relevant? You're doing all this work making assumptions about where quantum computing will be. You know, not all of the work in quantum computing is visible to everyone. Do you communicate at the very highest classified level, or do you maintain a wall?
So in my laboratory, we don't do classified work on our campus. We're not involved in that at all. We do have people who have access to information that can help inform us about the threat environment, and therefore give us tools where we can prioritize the kind of work that we do to have maximum impact. In the area of quantum computing, I don't have any direct information that I have available to me in the classified setting for. I can't divulge anything because I don't know anything about the classified
so you literally,
area.
You know, you literally and your coworkers have no classified information. You can tell us everything you know, or is there a repository inside NIST of you know, secret stuff, state of the art of?
We have conversations with the folks in the intelligence community at classified levels periodically when there is threat information in the cybersecurity case, for example. If there's threat information that exists at the classified level that we may need to know to prioritize some of the work that we do, but the work that we do is entirely in the open and unclassified.
Yeah, well, it's a tough, you know, very tough thing to think through how we want to get this right. You know, I know that, you know, in my district at Fermilab, they're busy building qubits that will actually last more than a fraction of a millisecond, because we lead the world in high Q superconducting resonators, which is one of the promising strategies. But, you know, this could immediately have big national security implications, sort of instantaneously at the point that there's some breakthrough. And trying to understand, you know, how we handle that is tough. And okay, so I guess that was the main question, and I will yield back my time.
Thank you, Dr. Foster. Mr. Loudermilk.
Thank you for second round there, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cuomo, in your written testimony, you discussed that we could thoughtfully insert blockchain in some appropriate projects already funded that would, I believe you said, help ensure that we stay on the forefront of this transformative technology. Can you elaborate on what some of those already funded projects may be, and also where they wouldn't be appropriate to use blockchain?
Well, yes. I mean, I mentioned in my testimony the small the SBIR, and that's basically the American seed funding, if that's kind of their tagline. And I think there are many agencies from NIST to NASA that are getting funding for that. So I think stipulating as part of the funding and encouraging blockchain usage across, whether it's sandbox development or land registries, I think going where there's already funding seems like a logical place to start.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Mr. Perlmutter.
Thank you. And two quick questions, and to Mr. Wright and to Mr. Cuomo. First, could there be an infinite number of virtual currencies? Question number one. Question number two, going back to my committee that I serve on in financial services, terrorism and illicit finance. So how do we deal with circumventing sanctions by use of some sort of opaque currency? I mean, I don't want to be the guy, I want to have a light touch, as you were talking about, Mr. Wright, but also I don't want to see Al-Qaeda or somebody else paid in cryptocurrencies and we can't find it. So it's an open-ended question to the two of you.
Thank you for the question. So with regards to the first question, can there be an infinite number of virtual currencies? I think the answer theoretically is yes. We've already seen an explosion in the number of virtual currencies that have been issued over the past 4 years. I think at last count there's at least 1,200 of them. In part, that's because people just take existing virtual currency, the code base for it, and they just create a new version of it, make a couple tweaks, and then release it. With regard to illicit finance, on most current popular blockchains, they're actually highly traceable. So you can discern activity that's going on the network because they rely on a peer-to-peer network, so you actually have to convey information to all the members on the network. And so there's data that's leaked, and there's different analytics companies that have emerged that actually enable you to trace them. There's a new generation of more anonymous virtual currencies that are now coming to the fore that rely on more advanced cryptography, and those present significant concerns, particularly with regard to the Bank Secrecy Act, AML, Know Your Customer requirements, and other laws and regulations related to our payment systems. In terms of how you regulate them, I think it actually raises a number of tricky and complex issues. One approach could actually be to try to steer activity towards regulated centralized intermediaries and exchanges where we can begin to uncover and collect some information about some of that activity in order to do more advanced network analysis to try to de-anonymize some of the activity on the network. There's also been research that's been done with these more anonymous digital currencies in order to poke holes and see if there's any vulnerabilities, putting on your Tom Cruise hat from before. So I think that it's going to be a problem, and it's going to continue to be a problem going forward.
Okay, and just quickly, Mr.
And just quickly, well, I like to believe I'm a blockchain subject matter expert. I'm not a cryptocurrency expert, so I yield to Mr. Wright's comments.
And I yield back. Thanks, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Perlmutter. Very informative and important discussion today. Very good. And moving forward, I'm going to ask the final question.
Mr. Chairman, Elizabeth would love to.
Oh, go ahead, Ms. Esty.
Thank you very much. With the question about the personal keys, could you do biometric keys? Is that something that could be, which presumably is much harder to lose your own biometric key? If you've lost that, then you probably don't need to worry about blockchain.
Yes, while it would be possible to use a biometric identifier as a way to generate a key in the same way that your iPhone does for unlocking your phone, you would then need some kind of biometric reader. So whatever computational device you're using would then have to do that. So I think that would be one of the limitations there is the hardware, not necessarily the crypto.
Thank you. So one final question. I'm going to kind of go back to Ms. Esty's first line of question. And so moving forward with the continued utilization of blockchain technology, what do each of you see as the most significant or transformative application for business or the public sector? And how can this committee play a role in providing that support? Mr. Jakar, we'll start with you and then it's down the line.
My research here in CRS hasn't really looked at what may be the most significant. I think there are some potential applications that may benefit, particularly government applications, and anything that can speed the efficiency of one transaction being validated from another. Unfortunately, the swath of available projects for that is just very wide at this point. So as the private sector, as researchers, and as agencies such as NIST continue to investigate this, as with internet technology, maybe something useful will bubble up that may be most applicable for government use.
We're just in the beginning stages, I think, of building our test bed to take a look at many different applications. If I were a betting man, I would say the application that really resonates is one that we haven't thought of yet.
Mr. Cuomo.
And I have to go back to digital identity. I think our digital lives, in many cases, are a mess. We are leaving parts of our digital life all over the place.
Totally agree.
And I think cleaning it up with some standards like what's happening with Sovereign Foundation, I think could go a very long way and be an equal opportunity employer across government, industry, education, and more.
Mr. Giannis.
I don't know if it'll be the most, but I think food is a very important thing for society. And the idea that we could digitize food, it's one of the frontiers that hasn't been digitized, the learnings that we can get from that, the transparency that we can give to consumers increasingly concerned about food and where it comes from, we think will be important for society.
Thank you. Mr. Wright.
I think public open blockchains are actually the major use case that will emerge, and they'll serve as a spine and a backbone for a number of different open protocols that transform a range of industries. And I think in terms of how we can encourage that here, I think regulatory clarity would be welcomed and helpful.
Okay. Well, look, thanks for a truly great discussion from the members, great questions too. So the record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional comments and written questions from members. This hearing is adjourned. Thank you, gentlemen.
That was fun.
It's nice to actually have this.
One set to go to college, right? And this set to members.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I'll bring it back to the office. Okay. I wasn't sure where you're going next.
I'm not sure either. What do I got?
You don't have anything until Thursday. No. We got the votes about 1:15, 1:30. That leaves you a little over an hour.
I'll get some cards from you.